A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, support the channel, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. Hi guys, this is the first part of What If Naruto Had Light release. I hope you enjoy. Before this story begins, I'd like to let everyone know that this story is not complete. I do not know if the author will complete it or not. It is an excellent story and I hope everyone enjoys it. 12 years ago, a nine-tailed fox suddenly appeared. Its tails lashed out, smashing mountains, and sending tidal waves crashing to the shores. The ninja of the hidden leaf rose up to defend their village from its monstrous rampage. Hold the attack, and wait for the fourth, a shinobi roared. He had already been in combat with the beast, and had a cut over his left eye to prove it, before he too resumed his attack on the brute. It's getting closer, another desperate-sounding ninja stated. Don't let it near the village. He sounded for all the world, like a worried father and husband. Meanwhile, the fox continued its mindless-seeming rampage, its every step crushed the very ground it stood upon. Then appearing out of nowhere, was a giant toad, wearing a kimono jacket, carrying a tanto, and smoking a pipe. Atop the toad's head, stood a man. He had blonde hair, with jaw-length bangs framing either side of his face, blue eyes, and wore a serious expression on his calm face. His attire consisted of a standard Konoha uniform, with two bands on both of his sleeves, a green flak jacket, blue forehead protector, and blue sandals. He also wore a short-sleeved long white haori over his normal attire, closed in the front by a thin, orange rope. The haori was decorated by red flame-like motifs on the edges, with the kanji for 4th Hokage, Yondaime Hokage, written vertically down the back. He faced the Kyuubi no Kitsune, in mortal combat, sacrificing his life to subdue the beast, and seal it in a human body. He was the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Minato, aka the Yellow Flash. Uzumaki Compound. 12 years later. The golden-haired, kept long, full, and well-maintained, in a simple topknot which still allowed it to reach his shoulders, the blue-eyed, 12-year-old boy, took a deep, calming breath while his eyes were closed. He held the black tsurugi blade in his dominant left hand, with familiarity and confidence, but not arrogance. He knew he was not the kenjutsu master his mother had been, not yet at least. Naruto Uzumaki opened his eyes, and looked across from him to the woman, waiting for him to strike. He was dressed in a navy blue short shirt kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor that is visible at his wrists and ankles, a haori, the same golden shade as his hair with two violet Uzumaki spirals on each side, and ninja sandals the same color as the haori. The woman standing in front of him, was his aunt, his mother's half-sister, Uzumaki Yugao, a young woman, age 22, with straight, purple hair, reaching down to her waist, with warm brown eyes, and a shade of red lipstick. Normally, when on duty, or about to go on duty, like now, she wore a standard Anbu uniform, consisting of black and gray armor, metal arm guards and a katana, strapped to her back. She has the signature Anbu tattoo on her right shoulder. Her mask hung low over her chest. It is a porcelain mask, resembling a cat, with 3 red stripes, 1 vertical stripe on the forehead and 2 horizontal stripes, 1 on each cheek. She was allowed to adopt him, when she became a chunin, at the age of 16, before that he was homeless. After he turned 4 and the orphanage kicked him out. For some reason, the village council tried to block her adoption of him, until she, with the aid of the Hokage, sent a petition to the daimyo himself, along with medical records and an affidavit from Senju Tsunade, herself, attesting to the fact that they were blood-related. Uzumaki Kushina, his mother, was Uzumaki Yugao's half-sister. That year was also the year when Senju Tsunade returned to the village and assumed the mantle of 5th Hokage. During that time, Tsunade decided that it was time the council was reminded that Konoha's government was not a democracy but a military dictatorship. The council, even the elders, served at the Hokage's pleasure. Several council members were removed from office. Those that protested too vehemently had their heads removed. The elders were all retired. Elders Homura and Kotoru went into retirement gracefully. Elder Shimura, however, tried to protest with force, and was reminded of why Tsunade was a Sannin. There was a village-wide purge of all root ninja. Those that could be redeemed were sent to sanitariums, others were given merciful deaths. The elders were replaced shortly thereafter by people Tsunade could trust, her sensei and former third Hokage, the new head of the Uchiha clan and chief of the Konoha police force, and for the first time a civilian, the owner of Ikiraku's ramen stand. The former head of the Uchiha, Fugaku, had become a missing nin, but nobody knew why. Naruto's attention returned to the present, but his aunt was not where she was before. In a blur of motion, she appeared right in front of her nephew, as she swung her own blade toward his neck. "You should stay focused in battle, Naruto-oi," she admonished with a smirk, "the enemy will not show you any mercy." Naruto ducked low, below her swing, and pivoted counterclockwise, bringing his foot behind the ankles of his aunt. Yugao gave a small hop as his feet passed hers. This presented Naruto's back to her, but before she could capitalize on his position, he rolled forward, before pivoting back to fend her off with the point of his sword. He blinked, because she was no longer there, when he suddenly felt the point of a kunai against his throat. He looked up to find his aunt staring down at him with a grim expression. "What had you so distracted, Naruto?" she asked, as he surrendered. "Even when we started training together, I never got the drop on you this badly." Yugao stood back, returning her katana to her scabbard. Naruto sighed. "I was daydreaming about the past," he told her. "Before that, I was wondering what I always wonder. About why the villagers hate you," she concluded for him. "As you know, I've been studying Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, and I found out something interesting about the Biju." "Did you know? They cannot be killed," Naruto explained. "They can be discorporated for a time, but being made of pure chakra, they will eventually regenerate. The only way to make sure they can't hurt anybody is to seal them inside a person. The nine's chakra is so potent, however, that anybody but an infant would be corrupted by its influence, because their chakra coils don't fully form until the 8th day of life for a boy, 12 for a girl." "I know, I was born on the day the Nine Tails attacked," Naruto began, as he reasoned. "I've also found out, I was the only child born that day." Yugao felt a trickle of sweat begin at the nape of her neck and make its way down her back. Did he figure it out? Then, he lifted up his shirt. "Then there's this," he stated as he channeled chakra from the region below his belly button, and like a phantom being revealed, a spiral, looking a lot like the Uzumaki spiral, surrounded by different runes and calligraphy appeared. "This is the 8 trigram sealing array," Naruto explained, though from the look on her face, as he studied her, she knew exactly what it was. "Aunt Yugao." Boom, boom, boom. Uzumaki Yugao sat up abruptly. The explosions outside her window had woken her up. Pushing back the covers, John and Anbu, call sign, Cat, stepped to the window overlooking the training ground of their clan compound. There she saw her beloved nephew, pounding his fists into the earth, in apparent frustration. Naruto is a ninjutsu prodigy with 3 nature affinities: earth, wind, and lightning. And 3 Kekkei Genkai: magnet release wind and earth, explosion release lightning and earth, and plasma release lightning and wind, but because of the strict requirements of the Ninja Academy, had failed his genin graduation exam twice already. It was always the same jutsu too, the clone jutsu. The Hokage set the requirements for the exam in stone, and just because someone has a special ability, does not give them preferential treatment. Tsunade made sure her ninja remained humble and knew the basics before they moved on to better things. Everything else with Naruto's education was rather good. He was above average in academics, only the Haruno girl surpassing him in grades, but she was a fangirl for Uchiha, practically useless, as far as the violet-haired kunoichi was concerned. As far as ninja skills went, he was a force to be reckoned with for a chunin. Don't get me started on academy grads, and other genin, she thought proudly, though he never showed his full potential at school. He never wanted to call undue attention to himself, and risk abduction by Cloud, like his mother, and the Hyuga heiress almost were. Only the Hokage and the elders knew of his Kekkei Genkai, though his 3 nature affinities were common knowledge. He, of course, being an Uzumaki and her nephew, was a phenomenal swordsman, and a genius at sealing arts, already reaching the intermediate levels. He was particularly interested in space-time sealing, like the Hiraishin, and summoning arts. He did not need Kenjutsu or Fuinjutsu to pass the class. Those were additional skills that made him unique. If he went all out with his martial arts training, he could decimate those brats in his class. There are few chunin that could equal his might, and only one genin, Guy's little clone, though he allowed himself to be defeated repeatedly by his classmate, Sasuke. His kunai jutsu and shurikenjutsu would make even a few jonin proud, and add a weapon to his taijutsu, and there were very few Jonin who could defeat him, unless they used their experience against him. Though again, he only allowed Itachi's little brother to best him. Only in ninjutsu did he allow himself to excel. Except for the clone jutsu, he really was a genius at using his chakra. His chakra control was the best she had ever seen for a genin level ninja. He can substitute himself with anything equal to his mass or smaller, within 100 meters, faster than the eyes could blink. Yugao chuckled to herself. One of his favorite tactics is to switch places with the thrower, whenever someone throws a weapon at him. Naruto can even use other objects in his substitution. He once used it to substitute Sarutobi's grandson, who had climbed atop a tall building and became trapped into a pile of dead leaves, with only a twig as the substitute. He calls it surrogate substitution. If that was not enough, he invented an interesting innovation on the transformation technique. He calls them true transformations, and he can change himself at the genetic animals and plants or molecular inanimate objects level into anything, and it's a solid change, not an illusion. He can actually fly when he becomes a bird, and even has a menstrual cycle when he becomes female, though after some tests conducted by Tsunade and Shizune, he is infertile in any form but his natural one. The only problem he has in his ninja arts, and this is where having such massive chakra reserves, high Sannin levels and growing every day, can be a double-edged blade. The chakra control needed to create illusions is all but impossible, and required a lifetime to perfect. Everything from S-rank genjutsu to the academy clone technique were out of reach for people like Naruto, and thanks to the Kyuubi's power being drained into Naruto several times per second, such control would remain out of his reach, and nobody could tell him why. The law passed by the Sandaime was still in effect, and an S-ranked secret. Yugao walked away from the window, went into her closet, and got ready for the day. After getting dressed, she went down to eat. She saw another set of dishes drying in the rack, telling her Naruto had already had his breakfast. It was a few minutes later, as she finished, when she heard, "Awesome, woohoo," coming from the backyard. Not a minute later, Naruto came slamming through the door, with a mile-wide grin on his face, followed on his heels by another Naruto, followed by two more. Their kitchen was suddenly full of Narutos, and the last one through, turned and closed the door. There seemed to be something different about his eyes. They were no longer the violet color of his mother. They seemed to glow an eerie white. The pupil was elongated into a diamond shape. Naruto immediately began to speak. Yugao could tell he was excited. "I did it, Aunt Yugao, I did it." Even though she knew what he meant, she still asked, "What did you do, Naruto-kun?" If she thought his smile could not get any brighter, she was wrong. "I finally succeeded in making a clone, and they're not just any kind of clone, they're solid," and he looked over at the other clones and nodded, which was returned. Then, in a flash of light, an owl perched on a counter, a plasma blade formed in another hand, and some silverware was orbiting in Naruto's head. They can perform on their own ninjutsu, taijutsu, chores, meaning D-ranked missions, or even run errands. Even better than that, he said as he moved over to the one with the orbiting spoons, "Watch this." Naruto gave the clone a moderate punch to the face, which only turned the clone's head. Nothing happened. There was not even a trickle of blood running down his cheek. There was only a small crack, with a kaleidoscope of light shining through. An instant later, in a small flash of light, the crack was gone. They're perfect for taijutsu practice. Don't dispel unless the task they were created for is completed. Yugao's odd expression turned to a pleased one, as she jumped up and gathered the one talking into a hug. As she did so, the other three dispelled in a flash of light. The back door opened again. "Hey, Aunt Yugao, why are you hugging a clone?" The expression on her face was priceless. "I sent them in to test another capability, memory transference. They are a perfect scouting tool and will help with training." Yugao was thoughtful. "They almost sound like the shadow clone jutsu, invented by the second Hokage," she mused out loud. Naruto's eyes widened, but she explained, "It's a kinjutsu in the sealing scroll. There was no way you could have learned it, unless the Hokage wanted to play favorites, and you know she doesn't do that." Naruto nodded. "That's true. This one is better than that one, because, if there's a drawback to that bunshin, it's the fragility of it. With this bunshin, you don't have that failing." "What do you call these bunshin?" she asked. "I'm calling them Senko Bunshin no Jutsu, or Flash Clones," Naruto answered. "Do you think you could teach me this jutsu?" she asked hopefully. "After everything you've done for me, I would be happy to teach you," Naruto said to her. causing Yugao to smile, but I don't think you can learn it, Aunt Yugao. Why not? She asked, slightly hurt. You don't think I have the chakra reserves? It's not a matter of chakra. She looked confused, so he elaborated, in order to create my flash clones, I combined all three of my nature affinities into one jutsu. When I did that, something changed inside me, I don't know what it was, but I may have discovered something. What? Yugao asked, immediately more concerned for her nephew, who was as much a son to her, as any she may birth in the future, than herself. What did you find? Naruto's face was radiant as he spoke. I found Luminance, Aunt Yugao, which is why I've named it Kidoton, also called Light Release. The next day was Monday. Naruto arrived at school at his usual time, but as he was approaching the door, he reached out to open it, when the door just slammed open, hard. The few, who were in the classroom already, looked over at the sudden noise. This had been happening since yesterday, weird things, like books floating to him, lights coming on as he entered the room, before his hand even went toward the switch. Luckily, his eyes reverted to their original color, and it appeared he did not need them to summon a flash clone. When they were activated, strange things seemed to happen to his perceptions. People seemed to move, almost at a standstill. Not only that, he seemed to be able to see things he should not see. Which was something he did not want to think about, not until he understood more about his new ninjutsu style. Naruto saw the other kids staring at him in annoyance. He just stood there embarrassed, but chuckling and scratching the back of his head. He carefully reached over, and making sure he actually touched it this time, carefully eased it shut. Then he quickly walked with his head down to his normal seat. He quickly and still carefully moved his chair back, sat down and scooted forward. Naruto looked around to see who had gotten to school ahead of him. There was Hinata Hyuga, the timid and kind, but beautiful and deadly, heiress to the Hyuga clan. When she was 4, she was nearly kidnapped by the leader of the diplomatic delegation from Kumo. Her uncle Kazashi and her father were able to get to her in time to prevent abduction. They were forced to kill the delegate, and the Raikage demanded the head of the two responsible or risk a war. Tsunade would have none of it though, and despite the Sandaim's urging to comply, she called the Thunder Shadow's bluff. She had the entire delegation seized and held hostage, which allowed her to get a hold of their diplomatic papers, and among those papers were orders signed by the Raikage himself. It stated that the true purpose of the delegation was to seize any and all opportunities to cripple Konoha, so he could go to war and destroy them. When this was learned, she did the one thing nobody expected her to do. She told on him. She sent copies of the delegation's orders to every embassy in every nation Kumo traded with, warning them to be careful of clouds bearing gifts. When word reached the daimyo of Kaminari of his Raikage's use of diplomacy to sabotage other nations, he was livid. The international rules of diplomacy between nations was set forth by the emperor himself, and for a nation to violate those rules was unheard of. The Lightning Daimyo publicly censured his Raikage, and ordered him to issue a public apology, not only to Konoha and Fire Nation, but to all the nations he sent diplomatic missions to, all of which were ordered to return home, and were now restricted to 1 or 2 delegates per mission. That event changed the Hyuga heiress. It made her buckle down on her training, so much so that she was in the running along with Sasuke Uchiha to be Rookie of the Year. Naruto had watched her fight, and was impressed, and concluded that in a pure taijutsu match, if they ever went all out against each other, he doubted whether he would win. He had watched her and her kinsman, Neji, perform their taijutsu style, at different times. Neji was stiff and slow, looking more like a marionette than a real boy. Hinata, however, moved like she was dancing with an unknown opponent. It was a dance of death. Her relationship with Naruto was complicated. He knew she had a crush on him, and he was nice to her, courteous, and kind, but he never wanted to lead her on. His feelings for her were not the same. Naruto was happy to be her classmate, friend, and hopefully teammate, but he has no romantic feelings for her at all. He has always preferred more mature ladies, at least, since he started liking women. The other two here before him were both boys, Shino Aburame and Sasuke the Bastard. The Aburames were an odd clan. They seemed to be ultra-logical and reasonable to the extreme. They share a symbiotic relationship with a hive of insects, which live within their host, feeding on their chakra. In exchange, they aid them in combat. Naruto, if he ever fought Shino, would try to use his lightning release to turn himself into a bug zapper. Just the thought of those bugs crawling on him made his skin crawl. Shino and the Uzumaki had a cordial working relationship and were neutral with each other. Naruto turned his gaze on the other class member, already here this morning. Sasuke Uchiha. To say the two boys hated each other would be a mild description of their relationship. In Naruto's estimation, Sasuke represented the worst example of what a clan nobleman should be, even worse than Neji, and neither had any reason to put on airs. Neji was a branch family Hyuga, and would never be in danger of becoming clan chief, unless 4 people in front of him were unable to do it, for whatever reason. Sasuke at least had a more legitimate reason for being cocky. He was second in line, after his older brother, Itachi. At the moment, his mother was the clan chief, after his father became a missing nin, in a failed coup attempt. When Naruto was placed in this class, he observed Sasuke's attitude with his own eyes. Sasuke was top dog in everything, except academics, and then, second only to Sakura Haruno. Sasuke would be a shoe-in for Rookie of the Year for this class, which would grow his ego out of all proportions. So, Naruto took it upon himself to teach the Uchiha a lesson in humility. It became a driving goal, something other than the finish line to strive for, something that would satisfy the gods of karma and perhaps make the village better overall. Naruto started this class as the dead last, as he did before, after his first failure, but he quickly advanced through the rankings of the class, until, after 5 months of hard work, he was just behind Sasuke. Naruto decided to stay there at the time, because until he was put in a position to complete the Genin exam, his plan would not matter. Now, however, with the completion of his flash clone technique, his goal was almost ready to come to fruition. It would just need a cherry on top to make the embarrassment that much sweeter. Last night, as soon as his and Yugao's excitement had been reined in, they sent their respective clones off to the Hokage, hers a shadow clone, and his Senko Bunshin, to make sure he could use that clone in the exam. It was confirmed, and, quote, if Orochimaru could use mud clones during his Genin exam, you can use your flash clones. The guidelines set forth by Gigi, and Madara state that any clone technique the student knows is admissible for the exam, but I'm classifying this new Kidoton an S-ranked secret. Until you're a Chunin, until then, do what you can to develop it in secret. These bloodline selects are rare enough as it is. I know of only one other in existence. We'll have any number of villages trying to get their grubby little hands on you, and they won't always come in force. A kunoichi batting her eyes at you would be all that was needed to get their hands on your seed, therefore until further notice, no girlfriends, end quote. As Naruto was lost in his memories, the rest of the class filled up. They were chatting amongst themselves. Naruto welcomed his best friend, Kiba Inuzuka, and his companion, Akamaru. For some reason nobody could think of, Naruto's senses seemed to be more acute than most children. For example, Naruto could hear a pin drop in another room, and even before acquiring his Kidogan, last night, Naruto had excellent night vision, and the whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks were in fact very sensitive touch organs. They, along with his sensitive ears, allow him to sense the difference in air pressure, and locate unseen obstacles, when even his night vision is hampered. These senses, coupled along with an acute sense of smell, make Naruto as at home at night, in the dark, or otherwise low visibility, as he is in broad daylight. Naruto was never afraid of the dark, and he had an excellent sense of direction. It was for this reason, and because Aunt Yugao was best of friends with Kiba's older sister, Hana, she introduced Naruto to Kiba. Naruto needed someone who could understand him, and because not only can Naruto, Kiba, and the other Inuzuka hear in frequency ranges greater than humans, they could also speak in those ranges. In truth, Naruto is able to hear in a slightly broader frequency threshold than Kiba and other Inuzuka, but the difference is not that great. The Inuzuka were one of the few clans in Konoha that have totally accepted Naruto, therefore they allowed Naruto and Kiba to undergo the clan's sensory training together. For that reason, Naruto and Kiba have become like brothers. Kiba was just below Naruto in taijutsu and kunaijutsu, as well as kunai taijutsu, and what Kiba lacks in stamina, like Naruto, he makes up for in true grit. Like a hound that will not quit once it has a scent, Kiba refuses to back down unless somebody makes him. Kiba has a heart of gold, and a silver tongue, that could charm the birds out of the trees, and he is tenacious in backing up his friends. As Kiba sat down next to Naruto, speaking in lower than human frequencies, the blonde touched Kiba's shoulder, and whispered, "I did it, Kiba." The Inuzuka turned a confused eye on Naruto, Did what? He asked, responding in kind to Naruto. Naruto just smiled huge. What have I been trying to do for almost 18 months? Kiba thought hard for a moment, then realization dawned. You're kidding, but Naruto shook his head, still grinning huge. You have to show me, he burst out. Naruto nodded. I will, but not here. I'm going to keep it under wraps until the exam, he said. Why? Kiba wondered. One of the first rules of combat, Naruto reminded him, never show your strength, until the last possible moment. As this was happening, the door to the classroom slid open. Through it, walked two men, Baruka Yumino, and Mizuki. They were the two instructors for this class. Mizuki has white, shoulder-length hair with blue-green eyes. He wore the standard attire of the Konoha nin, which included a flak jacket and forehead protector, which he wore like a bandana. Baruka-sensei is a man of average height and build. He has brown hair that he keeps in a ponytail, dark eyes and a scar that runs across the bridge of his nose, which he has had since his youth. He wears the standard Konoha shinobi uniform, complete with forehead protector, sandals, and flak jacket. His sleeves are also rolled up a quarter of the way. Senju's voice, Naruto as Tsunade tried to make her voice sound seductive, asked, why don't you come up to my office sometime? The whole class gasped. They had seen Naruto's transformation before, but were unprepared for him to sound like her too. Baruka was just looking at the incarnation of his Hokage. He looked as if he really were about to say something, but at the last minute he turned his head down to look at the clipboard, and just said, a terse, good. After returning to his natural form, Naruto walked back to his seat, looking directly at the face of his Hokage, and gave a small wave to her visage to let her know that he did indeed see her. Her face, as she realized that enclosed the whole, was priceless. Fact, light and all other physical forces of nature in our world, function the same way as in Naruto's world. On the electrodynamics of moving bodies, aka, the special theory of relativity, by Albert Einstein, 1905. Warning. Scientific content extracted from Wikipedia. Light studies Hokage's eyes only by Sandaime Hokage. Sarutobi. Here is an introduction. The subject of this study, for security purposes, will be referred to as Kit, and shall otherwise not be named. The Hokage should know who the term Kit is referring to, and therefore, should this report fall into unintended hands, then Kit's identity should be protected. The purpose of this study is to learn as much as we can about a recent bloodline select, discovered here in Konoha. The Kekkei Tota, Kidoton, named by Kit, the discoverer, was the ability to employ light itself. At our current level of understanding, we know quite a bit about light. It is a form of electromagnetic radiation, EMR, and the typical human eye responds to certain wavelengths of EMR. In terms of frequency, this corresponds to a narrow bandwidth of frequencies. It has a color shift range from red to violet, respective of wavelength and frequency, and is the fastest physical force we know of, moving at 299,338 meters per second in a vacuum. Of course, a typical Byakugan has been recorded seeing into the near-infrared range. This was the assumption of the range Kid would be able to perceive when Kid asked myself and a close relative, since Kid was a minor at the time of experimentation, to aid Kid in studying and developing this Kekkei Tota. We were wrong. Upon awakening this jutsu, Kid also awakened a dojutsu. Kid calls it the Eye of Luminance, or Kidogan. What it does is allow Kid to perceive the entire electromagnetic spectrum, radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays, and associate energies, including the energy of motion. Kid cannot see chakra within the chakra coils, only once it's been discharged, nor may Kid perceive nature energy. Kid can see the chakra system, in its entirety, including the tenketsu, and when they are open or not, as it is an organ system, within our bodies, and the 8 gates, and whether they have been opened recently. This dojutsu also gives Kit's vision, unparalleled telescopic and microscopic capabilities of anything within line of sight. Using radio waves to gamma rays, Kit can judge distance to the micron, and the true molecular composition of any objects Kit perceives. As stated previously, the Kidogan can perceive sonic waves and other vibrations. This manifests as a form of synesthesia. Tones and movement always emit some form of vibration, as the electrons of even a thrown object pass through the gases of our atmosphere. The electrons of the atoms, that form the molecules of the atmosphere, and the object in flight, vibrate against each other and produce things like friction, momentum, and other things typically associated with objects in motion. Kit can perceive that with Kit's dojutsu, which looks like the Byakugan, but has a diamond-shaped pupil that Kit can control on instinct. Kit's eyes collect the stimuli and somehow, Kit's tympanic membrane vibrates in harmony, which Kit's brain interprets sympathetically as sound, or vibrations along Kit's whisker marks, which we know from previous interactions with Kit, are true sense organs, all of which moves at the speed of light, so Kit would have more than enough time to react in a combat situation, or be able to thwart an ambush situation, before the attackers even moved. When the Kidoton is not activated, Kit's normal vision is still quite acute, and it is still able to perceive EMR from far ultraviolet FUV to far infrared FIR ranges. Kit's senses of hearing and touch have not been altered, they are still the same as they have been since his birth, the only difference is the sympathetic vibrations Kit receives when Kit witnesses an event. It's the same mechanism in the brain that allows one to flinch when one sees a mirror image of one's hand get smashed with a hammer, when the person knows the image in the mirror is not even real. Shuriken at moving targets while Kit was blindfolded, as long as the M field was active. Another discovery we found, sometimes when Kit wasn't concentrating an object would slam open or closed with greater force than Kit wanted. Photokinetics was the term we coined for a remarkably interesting phenomenon Kit discovered about photons and the path of light. Whether it was throwing a kunai, or a punch, or opening a door, it seemed to combine with the direct force Kit would normally use from Kit's flesh and move the object in question, with more force than Kit intended. Light is the fastest physical force in the universe that we know about, its speed is only thwarted when it meets interference, planets, stars, and other matter, its speed is hardly altered, unless it encounters heavy gravity. From that speed there is a force which can be imparted, and if a sufficient enough force is applied, it can cause a change in motion. This was another example of overexcited electrons, applying more energy than was necessary, in this instance, touch repulsion. The force electrons bring to bear against one another, negative repelling negative charges, when they make physical contact. This happened in a similar way to how the M field functioned, Kit's chakra was being channeled in the direction of repulsion, which added to the force normally coming from electrons. We again tried ramping up the chakra output, to see how powerful we could make the effect. We were in a small forest clearing, about 10 yards in radius, but Kit's force was so powerful, that it flattened a 50-yard radius section of forest, as easily as one could flatten grass by walking on it. Kit's close relative and I had to erect an earthen dome, or we would have been flattened along with it, and Kit was sent 20 feet into the air and came down hard, because Kit pushed the same force into the ground, as Kit did in other directions. We repeated the process we used for Kit's M field, reducing the effects gradually, then learning to control how much force to use. At the end of the week, Kit was using Kit's photokinetics as instinctively, as Kit was using Kit's hands and feet to push matter away. By the end of week 2, Kit could pull, by week 3, Kit was manipulating all forms of matter with photokinetics, as easily as Kit could with Kit's hands, and by week 4, Kit could do it without looking at the object in question, once Kit learned to couple Kit's M field sensory ability, with Kit's photokinetics and his physical senses. Week 2, breaking the visible spectrum, spectra, and wave taming. Was not glowing. I told Kit, it was the ambient light, in most cases the yellow light of the sun, which is a roughly equal mixture of the entire spectrum of visible light. When this light encounters a surface, parts of the spectrum are absorbed by the object, while other wavelengths or parts of the spectrum are reflected or scattered. The new reflected light spectrum creates the appearance of a color, as it passes into our eyes. That seemed to light a gleam in Kit's eyes as Kit looked at the leaf, and concentrated, and before me and Kit's relative, the leaf began to change color. At first, it was a slow process, then gradually, one section of the leaf began to change color, going from red to orange, then Kit's progress became easier, and the leaf began flashing through the color spectrum. Even the infrared and ultraviolet forms of light, Kit could now see unaided, put in an appearance. To say, I was intrigued by this spectacle, would do nothing to tell you about how I was truly feeling, and I asked how Kit was doing this and Kit told me. Kit was altering certain properties of the wave, by allowing the photon to keep its energy, but altering the wave's length and frequency. Kit called it, breaking the visible spectrum, or spectrum breaking, and it was an idea Kit had for Kit's first ninjutsu, once we finished learning as much as we could, before his genin exam. As Kit continued to cycle the visible spectrum, Kit had another epiphany, color, and appearance, were masks, barriers one put on to make themselves feel better, and lie to themselves. That week, Kit coined a new term Kit would use to associate with those characteristics. Kit from then on called them spectra and facade. We continued along that vein. For the rest of the week, Kit learned Kit could alter the flow of light waves around Kit and other objects, which essentially could alter the observer's perception of where the object was located. It took the principle of geometrical optics and turned it into a tool for the wielder. We thought we'd found the perfect invisibility method. When Kit pushed every photon of EMR, Kit could see away from Kit and the other object, but it seemed Kit would be essentially blind if Kit used it. Not that it would hinder Kit too much, with Kit's Fox senses, and now Kit's M field when Kit used it. This could make for a perfect trap, and a way to assassinate somebody by tricking them into a harmful situation. Kit has given a name to this technique also. It is called wave taming, because it is doing exactly what its name implies, conquering light waves. Besides that, Kit could actually create physical illusions for an opponent, tricking their perceptions, and at its ultimate expression, delay when the light photons reach the eye. This could possibly render all dojutsu, at least the Byakugan, and maybe the Sharingan ineffective. It is imperative that the clans who own those dojutsu never read this, or they'll try to assassinate Kit. Week 3. The unseen spectrum Agenin, both nearly killed him if I recall. Kit's purpose was not to send Jiraiya to the hospital, just to make the women in the female side aware of his presence. Kit deemed what actually happened a better result. You are likely wondering why I included this aside in this report, when though humorous, it would be irrelevant in most people's eyes. That's because Kit did all of this from Kit's place of residence using radio waves and microwaves as mediums for altering the light properties, not within Kit's line of sight. The distance from Kit's dwelling to the hot springs is in excess of a mile from Kit's home, and Kit was able to expertly move the light in that area, enough to confound one of the best shinobi Konohagakure ever produced. Even you, Tsunade-kun, cannot deny Jiraiya-san's skills and intelligence. So, getting back on track, microwaves do not reach as far as radio waves, and only seem to be good for tracking something that's within Kit's line of sight. No, it's not the EMR in this instance, which Kit is already so good at utilizing that is my focus for this part of our study, but when Kit uses the Kidoton to perceive microwaves, Kit's brain, Kit's whole nervous system becomes supercharged. Kit says, it feels like everything is slowed down, as if the world is moving in slow motion, even sounds seem to take longer to reach Kit in this state than before. And, it's in this state that Kit says Kit can see sound waves, as they ripple through the atmosphere. Kit's other senses haven't changed. Kit can't suddenly hear frequencies Kit couldn't before discovering Kidoton. My supposition is Kit's nerves, when deploying Kit's Kidoton, change Kit's physiology slightly, evolving Kit's body and allowing Kit's nerves to fire at, or close to the speed of light. This will require further investigation, from a medical standpoint to verify, but that's neither here nor there. What makes this event worth mentioning, is Kit has observed sound waves being disrupted, or at least disturbed, when Kit employs microwaves. Kit doesn't know if it will have any practical applications. Kit decided to shelve experimentation until after graduation. Now, we leave the low-energy realm of the electromagnetic spectrum, and journey into the high-energy kingdom of light. Unlike in all previous experiments for this study, Kit had to fully deploy Kit's M field, while myself and Kit's relative stayed outside to prevent radiation sickness. While Kit remained within the dome, Kit took a leaf, as Kit did in previous experiments, then looked and felt for the electrons in the molecular bonds with his chakra. Kit from a previous jutsu style was already an expert in manipulating ions and exciting electrons. It didn't take long for Kit to have a steady stream of X-rays from the air itself. Kit held the energy still for just a moment, then Kit concentrated and shaped the invisible knife, the way Kit did when Kit first learned to use wind and sent it through the leaf. The X-rays severed the molecular bonds of the leaf, and it was sliced in half, just like when Kit completed the leaf-cutting exercise when Kit learned wind. Unlike wind, however, Kit couldn't just let the energy go. It was ionizing radiation. It could damage the ecosystem if it were left unchecked, so Kit, not knowing anything else to do, sent the X-rays into the ionosphere by increasing their wavelength to radio wavelengths. Kit repeated Kit's actions with gamma rays, this time exciting the gamma particles in the atomic nuclei, enough to release gamma-ray photons without causing fission or early decay. Then, Kit repracticed the leaf-cutting exercise, and disposed of it the same way. That method was inefficient. If Kit were in combat, Kit wouldn't have time to send it into the upper atmosphere, but that was solved when we learned that Kit's body was naturally immune to ionizing radiation. So, Kit learned to absorb X-ray and gamma-ray photons, which led to an outstanding discovery. When some of the chakra Kit used to perform these activities was returned to Kit's chakra reserves. Kit can recycle part of Kit's chakra, the same way Kit can when Kit's clones dispel, returning any unused chakra to their creator. As for being able to see through matter, Kit merely extended Kit's spectrum breaking technique to the entire M spectrum. Kit converts the radio waves and microwaves to X or gamma rays as they reflect into Kit's eyes, and Kit sees inside fine. Conclusion: the fourth week didn't bring forth any new revelations, it was just spent making everything we did for the last 3 weeks instinctive to Kit. We remonstrated the imperative to keep everything we learned and practiced here private, and Kit understood why quite well. It seems as if the last few weeks have taught Kit some wisdom. Most of that fourth week was also spent practicing Kit's other skills. The ones Kit would need to become a genin, and I must say, speaking as a former sensei myself, I know Kit is ready. You needn't worry, Hokage-sama, I never told, or informed, Kit of anything I haven't told any of my sons when they took the genin exam. I didn't give Kit any more advice than I would give Konohamaru, when it becomes time for Kit to become a genin. One other piece of information you may have become aware of: the first day, Kit learned about Kidoton. Kit can feel it when you use the crystal ball jutsu, and can see you through it as well, so word of advice, don't use that jutsu to when Kit's around or Kit may give you away, with or without meaning to, so be cautious when using that jutsu. It is one of most closely guarded secrets of the Hokage office. If there are any of my readers who have not figured it out, Kit is Naruto. This chapter is as much about his Kekkei Tota as this author wanted to include, told from the perspective of Hiruzen Sarutobi. It was the day Naruto had been waiting for since he was 5, his genin graduation exam. He woke up that day, the Monday after he, Gigi, and Aunt Yugao finally completed the study into his Kidoton. Naruto woke up early and completed his morning hygiene rituals, before heading into the kitchen to fix his breakfast. He took his time eating today, he just wanted to relax and have faith in his training. He had been through the exam before, of course, and knew what to expect. The steps of the exam would not change, and if he tensed up, he might choke. So, Naruto made himself pay attention to the steps he took to make his food, watched his steps as he sat at the table, cherished every bite of his meal, and made sure to chew thoroughly before swallowing. Naruto kept conscious of all his movements, something he learned from monks that came through Konoha, every once in a while, to help keep his mind off things he did not want to think about. Naruto checked his M field to make sure it was under his control, and made sure his electrons were only putting out their natural touch repulsion charge. Which had not been a problem for a whole month. He could now move anything with his photokinetics, well, anything 5 times his body mass, or lower, and had such fine control over it too. Naruto did 2 things at night before he went to bed. One was obvious. He used his photokinetics to practice lifting a set of weights, not just up and down, but he had them floating in orbit around his head. The other thing would be considered strange if anybody ever saw it happening. Naruto crocheted. It was perfect for dexterity training, and it was very good for hand and eye coordination, which was why he took it up as a hobby when he was 10. He would not say he was good at it, because only his aunt knew he did it, but he would say he is advanced for somebody with only 2 years of experience at it. When he began training to control his photokinetics, he decided that crocheting would help him practice fine motor control, so once he got control over it, he decided to start practicing basic knitting again, and it didn't take him long to get his photokinetic dexterity to be equal to his current skill level with yarn. His physical person would practice doing one project, while his PK would practice another project, and holding the yarn for both of them, which allowed him to practice multitasking too. Content that his light release was under his control. He had finished breakfast, and continued to go about his normal routine. Genin graduation exam. The art of deception. Naruto sat in his class, waiting to leave to go outside, and conduct the practical portion of the Genin graduation exam. They had just completed the academic section of the exam, which was equivalent to any average secondary school education attended by civilians in other parts of Konoha. Konoha shinobi and kunoichi would never be accused of ignorance, that's for sure. Naruto knows he aced this thing, so that was not his concern. Now that he would become a genin for sure, he began to implement his plan for the humility of the Uchiha. His kunai was buried in its chest in an instant. A window opened on an upper floor of the building across the street from the Uzumaki boy, and he sent another kunai into its throat, with enough force, that it pierced through the throat and into the spinal column. The throat was a secondary target, and would have gotten Naruto a single point, if it had not pierced so deep that it transected the spinal column from the front. Another dummy popped up right in front of Naruto, about 20 yards, and Naruto sent a star flying into its chest. It found its way into the chest cavity, piercing the heart and lungs. If it had been a living, breathing person before, it would have become a hunk of meat now. Outside the building, the other students watch Naruto move in awe. Even the teachers, despite hating him, could not begrudge the demon brat its skill. They have only seen a few Chunin move as efficiently and decisively as it. Sasuke was sweating. He knew that he would not have gained the Rookie of the Year, or even second place after Sakura's performance. He could not believe he had miscalculated so badly with his classmates. Sakura-san had certainly never shown much skill in the past, but had apparently been hiding her skill beneath the mask of a fangirl. Naruto had never really hidden his skills. He displayed his ninjutsu prowess quite often, but always lost to him in taijutsu and throwing. That is when it hit him. It's been staring at me this whole time. He was holding back with the things he lost to me in, then looking at the monitor as the blonde made his final throw and ended his session with a score of 48.15. If this is what he can do in throwing, what about the taijutsu section? Sasuke's self-assurance, already forming cracks because of Sakura's performance, now begins to crumble, as he watched the other genin hopeful exit the confidence course. The true spirit of the Hyuga clan. What they took exception to is her insistence on experimentation, using other chakra besides the generic non-elemental variety that every other honorable Hyuga uses. She used her elemental fire chakra in her attacks, which to their befuddlement, worked better than the baseline chakra. That however was just their issues regarding fighting style and was just their way of sniping at her. It was her attitude in public they had the real issues with. In their estimation, walking around with a stick up their ass, Hinata's words not theirs, was how a true Hyuga was supposed to act. Hyuga in their estimation, were better than everybody else, and everybody should be aware of it. Hinata refused to act that way, so in their opinion she was a disgrace to the clan. Sakura, when she told her parents she wanted to be a kunoichi, saw them look upon her with disgust. It was like she had told them she wanted to work in a brothel when she grew up. The traditional attitude about kunoichi was that they could only use their sex to be effective, and despite the rise of modern kunoichi like Tsunade of the Sannin, their Hokage and the likes of Kushina Uzumaki, the traditional view of kunoichi was still in the minds of most civilians, just a step above a prostitute. There was nothing they could do to dissuade Sakura from the path she chose. They let her start at the academy, and her mom, at least, thought it would be a good opportunity for their family to get her married into a good ninja clan. Sakura was excited on her first day of school, but her parents seemed to have blinders on about what a kunoichi did as a ninja. They did not allow her to train her taijutsu or throwing abilities at home, saying a good girl does not get into fights. They told her that if she ever found herself in such dire situations, to run away, or just wait to be rescued by her male ninja teammates. So, Sakura took to sneaking out at night to practice, which when she was 10, allowed her to meet her unofficial sensei, the one who taught her that being a true kunoichi meant she was a warrior, not a whore. Her sensei, another kunoichi, taught Sakura her hubby-style taijutsu, which since its movements when done properly look like a dance, would fool Sakura's parents, who definitely would not know any better. Sakura told them it was traditional at school for kunoichi to learn to dance, to entice men. That seemed to appease her parents' narrow view of the world and allowed Sakura to grow strong right under their noses. Another thing Sakura and Hinata had in common, though only one of them knew it, they both had a crush on the same shinobi. There was a reason Sakura wanted to be a kunoichi and go to the academy. When she was 6, she was attacked by some bullies in the park. They seemed to take pleasure in seeing the fearful expression on her face as they pushed her around between them. They finally worked up the nerve to actually hit her, when one of them reared back his fist, about to throw, and Sakura, though afraid, refused to cower, and was ready to take the hit on the face. The fist was stopped by another hand catching it. They all looked and there was Naruto, though she did not know it at the time. Naruto then kicked the crap out of those boys. It seems this was the second time they had pulled this bullying crap, and he had let them off with a warning. Naruto-kun, fuck those boys up, inner Sakura purred. It seems they ended up in the hospital, and were remanded to juvenile jail upon release. Sakura never saw Naruto again, until 6 months ago, when he was placed in her class. She talked to him after school and thanked him for the time in the park, and it was at this time that her mother walked into school to get her. Mebuki Haruno was not pleased that her daughter was talking to the demon, and when they got home, both of her parents gave her an ultimatum: if they ever saw her speaking to the demon again, they would pull her out of the academy and make her go to a real school. And because she was a minor until she graduated and got her headband, they could do it. Therefore, in order to appease them, she began to be mean to Naruto. They had heard her calling him Baka a time or two, and thought she was following their rules. What she was doing, at the suggestion of her sensei, who had become like a sister to Sakura, was deceiving them. In her mind, whenever she said Naruto Baka, she was really calling him Naruto-kun. Sakura's grades at school were also a deception. Except for academics, she made sure to maintain average grades in the other skills on her report card. It was something about the grades not really mattering for the exam, though sensei did not elaborate. The bout between the ladies was heating up. The Juho was a more fluid-like style than the Juken, and Sakura's movements from the hubby style seemed to be an almost mirror of the former. It was not just the styles that were a mirror reflection, the kunoichi were almost flowing together, but if there is one thing the Juho had over the hubby, was its decisive power. While they were both delivering solid blows to each other, and had the lacerations and contusions to prove it, hubby lacked the power to make any real, lasting damage. Juho, however, did, and the blows from Hinata's palm strikes, spear hands, and knife hands, were definitely taking their toll. Sakura, however, refused to give up, unless Hinata made her. And so, Hinata and Sakura were exchanging a particularly vicious set of blows. Sakura's movements were sluggish, Hinata's only slightly less so. Sakura thrust her palms forward into the Hyuga's chest, when a wide sweep of Hinata's palms parried Sakura's own arms so hard, she overbalanced, and would have corrected if Hinata had not sent a sweep behind her legs. Sakura still would have recovered, however, when with a sudden adrenaline rush, Hinata slammed a downward palm into Sakura's sternum, who was still in the process of falling. Sakura slammed into the ground, hard, and as her melon bounced off the ground she was in dreamland. Baruka declared, the winner was Hyuga Hinata. Upon hearing that, Hinata's legs gave out on her and she fell to her knees, next to the unconscious Rosette. Hinata was looking at the dead-to-the-world kunoichi in amazement. My kami, she whispered, not even Neji ni has ever given me this much trouble in a taijutsu bout before. Then leaning closer, whispered to the knocked-out girl, I hope Hokage-sama sees fit to put us on the same team. Sakura-san. She suddenly fell over to lay on Sakura's chest, and the Violette girl whispered before joining the Rosette girl in sleep, I look forward to testing each other again. Baruka looked over at the shinobi ring, to see the crumpled form of Uchiha Sasuke at the feet of Uzumaki Naruto, and upon looking at his partner, who nodded, we have to change a few things around, we won't be able to use the demon brat after all, declared Hinata and Naruto winners of their respective genders in taijutsu. It was the end of the genin graduation exam. In all, 27 candidates would graduate from this class. They had not yet been assigned teams, and it would be 1 week before they would be announced. At long last, the class was dismissed until the 15th of the month. Next week, the class dispersed. As soon as it was dismissed, Naruto went as fast as he could to the license registration office and got his official ninja license, which made him an adult in the eyes of every country on the map. Naruto, his headband in place over his brow, and license in a special seal all ninja have so they can keep it on them at all times, decides to head home, and had just made it out the door of the bureaucratic office, when he spotted Sakura sitting on a bench. He had actually seen her in there too. She was ahead of Naruto in another line. Naruto was about to walk past without speaking to her, when, Naruto-kun, wait up, please. Naruto's eyes went wide with surprise. It was not the words which halted him, it was who said them. He turned around to stare into the jade-green eyes of Sakura Haruno. Yes, Sakura-san, he asked, in curiosity. Sakura took a heavy breath and let it out slowly. First, I want to tell you that I'm sorry for the way I've treated you, after the first day you were in the class, and after I had just thanked you for stepping in and helping me when I was 6. If Naruto were surprised at her words before, he was dumbfounded at her words now. That's okay, Sakura-san, he granted, I forgive you, and you wouldn't be the first person to treat me bad after meeting me, it's happened before. No, it's not okay, and I didn't apologize to you to have you forgive me, Sakura snapped, not until I have explained. Masumi, daughter, came the whip crack of a stern voice. They jerked their head to the sound, and just striding up the street was a blonde woman, with the same shade of green eyes as her daughters, and it was the same angry expression he had seen on Sakura's face a time or two. What did your father and I tell you would happen if we caught you fraternizing with this boy again? The woman ranted, which ended in a shriek. Sakura has been waiting for this, and sent a discreet hand signal to the woman, watching from the tree across the street from her. She looked sidelong at the blonde boy. This could hit 2 targets with 1 kunai, she thought. This is gonna be fucking epic. Inner Sakura snarled. You said you'd remove me from school and send me to a real school if you caught me talking to Naruto-kun again, she said casually, nonchalantly. That's right, the older woman shrieked. I'll never know how we let you talk us into letting you become a kunoichi in the first place, she ranted, obviously missing the hidden leaf headband Sakura now wore as a hairband, until she could get to a salon and style it to something a kunoichi would wear. She had only grown it long because her dad thought girls were more appealing to men if they had long hair. Mebuki went to grab Sakura. Now come on, we're getting you away from him, and no more of this ninja nonsense. It's not something a proper young lady should be aspiring to become in the first place. The older woman tried to force the kunoichi to move, but other than her shoulder moving, Sakura did not budge. Please, take your hands from my person, Mebuki Haruno-san. Sakura's voice was cold and emotionless. Before I have you arrested for assault. Sakura's mother was shocked that her daughter would speak to her in such a smart tone. What's more, it was the mature tone of an adult. She grew stern again, still not putting the clues together. Don't you take that tone of voice with me, young lady, and went to slap Sakura, but the young kunoichi easily dodged the attack. Still in a calm voice, the Rosette kunoichi said in a firm tone of voice, before you go too far, Haruno-san, I must remind you of the consequences of trying to assault a ninja of Konoha. In Konoha, Sakura thumb pointed at the Hitai-8 resting in her hair. If you haven't noticed the date, today was graduation. I've told you all about it for the last month. I even marked it on the calendar in the living room, she reminded her mother. Today was the genin graduation exam, and I did quite well, if I do say so myself. You did better than that, Sakura-san, Naruto scoffed, coming into the conversation. You made the top 5 of the entire class. Only Hinata Hyuga and myself outperformed you, and got better scores than you. You even outdid Sasuke Uchiha in every category, he added, then looked at the Haruno matriarch. Your daughter is a force to be reckoned with, ma'am, and I would be honored to spar with her any day of the week. She would be a welcome addition on my team. Should our esteemed Hokage place her there, Naruto complimented, and Sakura's face was as pink as her hair. Her smile was as bright as the sun, and even managed to look shy while doing it. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she gushed. Sakura, Mebuki's voice brought their attention back to her. How could you do that to the man you're trying to convince to marry you? Men don't want girls who are better than them. Women are supposed to remain subservient to their men. Number 1. I never liked Sasuke like that. I only did that to disguise my true feelings. She trailed off while casting a glance at the blonde shinobi, who was looking at her mother like she had grown 2 heads, before turning her gaze back to her mother, before he turned to her, for someone else. I was never interested in him, she confirmed, and number 2, if I have to deliberately lose to somebody to convince them to marry me, then he's not somebody I want to be married to. She shook her head. Seriously, how fragile is the male ego that I would have to throw a contest, just to keep his interest in me? Naruto snapped his head around in slight pique. Hey, it's not all of us. Don't lump me in with whatever men she's talking about, that need a woman to be subservient to them, even lose to them to make themselves feel better. Besides, he said, turning back to Haruno-san, why would he need to be convinced to marry Sakura in the first place? She's got everything a man could want in a woman. Beauty, body, brains. With every compliment Sakura's blush grew deeper. Beauty that can stop even the best of men from thinking straight, even when she's angry. A body that packs more power in it than the fourth Rasengan. And brains, which are housed in an especially cute forehead. Any man would be blessed to be given even the time of day by Sakura, and should thank Kami-sama for being so blessed. And if they can't, they're either worthless, old, or they don't like women, Naruto concluded. The 2 women in the lane with Naruto just stood there gaping at him. I love him. Inner Sakura said with lust in her voice, with which Sakura could not disagree. She got back to the matter at hand. The fact of the matter is, Haruno-san, Sakura stated, getting her mother's attention, today was my genin graduation, and I passed. Sakura again pointed to her headband, which according to international law, makes me legally an adult, she finished. So, keep your hands off me, unless I give you permission, Sakura snapped out at her mother. Taken aback by Sakura's words, Mebuki snapped back, as long as you live under our roof, young lady, you'll abide by our rules, and I demand you stop this nonsense about being an adult. You're only 12, you need to be 18 to be considered an adult. She's right, ma'am, Naruto spoke again. These were laws established by the emperor of the Taiyo Empire, because ninja of any age can be sent into a battle, then all ninja, shinobi and kunoichi alike are looked upon as adults. We can get married, though Konoha military law requires us to be chunin when we get married, we can live as husband and wife, even bring forth children, though only the most irresponsible genin would do that. All of us are taught a contraceptive ninjutsu, to prevent accidental children. We can own property and run a business, though we must still conform to all other laws regarding these examples, except age restrictions of course. The point I'm trying to make, mother, Sakura concluded, is now that I'm an adult, I am no longer required to live, as you put it, under your roof, and may therefore reside anywhere I can afford. No, Mebuki quivered as she began to cry, you can't leave, we won't let you. There is nothing you can do to prevent it, Sakura said softly, nothing legal anyway, and as for letting me, you see over the past month as the graduation exam drew closer, I've been secretly moving my clothes and personal items out of your house. I've found my own place to live, and as soon as I begin earning money as a ninja, I'll be able to help with rent at my new place. Mebuki suddenly looked like she had aged 20 years, since she had stood here, and in a small voice asked, but where will you live, who will you live with? With me, came a voice from behind them, and Mebuki jerked her head in the direction of the sound. Only Sakura's mother was surprised. Sakura had known she was there, and Naruto had felt a presence within the trees. The person standing there was a fairly tall woman with a slender frame. She has light brown, pupil-less eyes, she is a violet, and keeps her hair styled in a short, spiky, fan ponytail. She regularly wears a fitted mesh bodysuit that covers her from her neck down to her thighs, and today was no exception, over which was a tan overcoat with a purple inseam, and a pocket on each side, a dark orange mini skirt, a dark blue belt, and pale gray shin guards. She wore the typical forehead protector, also wearing a small pendant that looks like a snake fang, and a wristwatch. Her name was Anko Mitarashi, and like Naruto, she was a social pariah here in the Leaf, all because she happened to have been a student of Orochimaru of the Sannin, now a missing nin. She was also one of his aunt's best friends. They were almost like sisters, which made Anko one of Naruto's precious people. Which was reciprocated by the buxom kunoichi, just promoted to full jonin, finally. Naruto smiled pleasantly when he saw her. Anko Oba-san, good of you to come down here, I was wondering what you were waiting for, he mused. Naruto nodded in agreement. The only thing that can be done with a biju is to seal them into a vessel, but they're too powerful to use an inanimate object, they will eventually break out of one. As a result, the only way to ensure they remain locked away, is to seal them into a living creature, a human. The Kyuubi's chakra, however, is too powerful for just anybody to house it. Only an infant whose umbilical cord has just been cut would work, because their chakra coils have not yet fully formed, and again, I was the only child born that day. That's the proof you need to know that he's the nine-tailed fox, Mebuki ranted, it should be executed, for all the people it murdered. Screw you, bitch, came Anko's reply. Mom, Sakura snapped, and as her mother turned to her, she saw her daughter holding a storage scroll, and a kunai. Sakura brought them close and said, watch closely. Fuin, and the kunai was sealed into the scroll, then she made the sign of the tiger, and touched her finger to the scroll immediately became alight. The scroll burned quickly, but steadily. Sakura was holding one end of it, when there was a metal clang on the ground, as the kunai returned to this dimension. This is what happens when you destroy a storage scroll, whatever is inside is released, so killing Naruto at this point is a really bad idea. We don't have any sealing masters in the Yondaim's caliber, even Jiraiya-sama is below his skill, Sakura informed her mother. Then he should be locked in prison for life, Sakura's mother raged, he should be kept away from decent human beings. Show me a decent human being, and I might agree with you, Anko muttered. Enko, still smiling, was about to say something else, when the village alarm started going off. They looked outside and noticed it was dark. They heard Sakura's door open. She stepped out. What is going on? There was a knock on the door, and when it opened, Neko was on the other side. Her voice was barely maintaining her Anbu professionalism, when she asked, Mitarashi Anko, have you seen Uzumaki Naruto? Enko pointed to the shinobi standing in her living room. What's this about, Neko-san? The Anbu just asked another question. How long has Uzumaki been here? We've only been here for a few minutes, Enko answered, and Neko visibly blanched, but Naruto, Sakura and me, have been in each other's presence for a few hours now. Neko's demeanor brightened at that, but Enko demanded, why, what's happened? The scroll of seals was just found missing, and camera footage showed Naruto Uzumaki was the one that stole it, but if he was with you, at the time of the theft, that doesn't necessarily prove my innocence, Neko-kun, Naruto reminded her. If I used a flash clone, while I was with them, I could still have stolen the scroll. All three kunoichi looked at him like he was crazy, and he scoffed, I'm thinking like a thief who would use something like this to frame me. So, I demand, to be escorted to the Hokage, and want the two heads of torture and interrogation, not present here to be there to interrogate me. Then with a growl he finished, someone is trying to frame me, thinking that I would cowardly choose to run instead of facing my accusers, which means they don't know who I am, or at least have a warped impression of me. His eyes were turning red as he grew angry, and once I clear my name, they're going to pay. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments.